watching Verified on Mirror Now. Thank you for joining us. We have a guest who's back on the radar after a while. He sort of disappeared a little bit when he was writing his new book, and now he's back. Amish Tripathi is in the studio. Welcome. It's been a while. I'm happy to see you.
Thank you. Pleasure seeing you as well.
So, new book is out, Raavan. Really cool. Yes, everybody's holding up a copy.
Branding.
Yes, we must remind our viewers that before taking up a career in literature as an author, you used to manage marketing, which is why you've shown up wearing a t-shirt with your book on it.
Absolutely. No such thing as too much marketing.
Shameless plugging, huh? I would like take off the jacket at some point. But this is a really interesting take on Raavan. Right? Was it I know that you've talked about the fact that it was difficult to write, but without, and I don't want to give too much away, but it's actually a look at his life before the kidnapping of Sita, right? And in some way, he does become a protagonist, a dark protagonist, but a protagonist, because you start to sort of root for him a little bit. Why did you decide to? Nobody's ever looked at him that way in India.
Yeah, you know, there have been attempts to kind of explore his story, but the meaning of the word Ramayana is the journey of Ram, right?
Yeah.
So the narrative is obviously the journey of Lord Ram as a hero, and all other characters come in as characters in what is essentially his story. So very rarely have you had a Sita Yana, very rarely have you had a Ravana Yana. We've had their stories in Puranik Kathas and and some other renditions, but so which is why exploring this was in some senses very interesting.
How much of this was research based, and how much did you have to fill in the gaps? A lot, I'm assuming.
No, there is a reasonable amount of research which goes in. There are many versions of the Ramayana, right?
Yes.
And in some ways it may appear new because most of us modern urban Indians, the version of Raavan we have in our minds is based on a 1980s television serial, which was relatively simplistic, in its approach to Raavan, showed him just as a pure quote-unquote villain, bad guy. The ancient versions were far more nuanced, not just the original Valmiki Ramayana, but many of the other ancient versions, Adbhut Ramayana, Ananda Ramayana, all of them, right? So perhaps my books are relatively closer in terms of their outlook to the ancient versions.
There was more texture in the ancient versions, yes.
Our ancestors always looked at things in a nuanced way. There was no simplistic black and white in anything.
No, but I remember when we read Ramayana in college in old Kannada, Hali Kannada as we call it.
So Ramayana Darshanam you would have read. Yeah.
Yes. I remember reading this whole this thing about how Raavan was a devout Shiva Bhakt,
yes, he was.
Which is why Shiva had his tapasya was so pure that he was given the power to fly, and he was an excellent king until that moment of weakness when he saw Sita, and in that moment of weakness, all of his excellence crumbled to lust. But your view on this is very different from that. It's not a one moment weakness.
No, because actually, like I said, even in the ancient versions, his bad points are not kind of hidden, right? The fact that he had a massive ego, this is there in most versions of the Ramayana. The fact that he had no control over his temper, and because of his temper, he did many things that he should not have, right? That is there in most of the versions of the Ramayana. The fact that he had no control over his love for the rasas, love for the pleasures, right, of life. Again, this is also there. But the thing is, it does not take away, as you rightly said, from his strengths. He was extremely scholarly. He was a very good administrator. He was a brilliant warrior. He was a brilliant musician. And in that sense, like I do a pop quiz in all my, in all my events. I ask them, is Raavan a pure villain? Is he a misunderstood hero? Or is he just complicated? And most people say, yeah, he's complicated, which is true for most of us, right?
I mean, if you consider, most sort of marquee literature, Shakespeare, for example, only had grey characters. There was no completely black or white. Everyone was sort of dark. Everyone was sort of, you weren't able to really decide. Lovable villains. This actually towards, and you find yourself as a reader somewhere in the middle of the book, sort of rooting for him, which is a surprising, and it's a surprising place to be.
And then when he loses it, you kind of get more and more repelled by him at the end, and
or
in that
angry
sense,
with him for messing up.
In that sense, a bit of sadness, the same way that Kumbhakarna would have on him, his younger brother. That you could have been a great man, and what are you becoming? What is wrong with you? And this was, this was the way it wasn't just our ancient versions of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Even our ancient Sanskrit plays, all of them actually had a lot of nuance. All of Kalidasa's plays, Bhasa's plays, they weren't simplistic because, look, real life is complicated, right?
Yeah.
And often what happens with you, or whether you're a good person or not, is not about what happens to you. Tragedy happens to everyone. It's about how you react with what happens to you.
At every one of those points.
All of us have troubles, yeah. Who has a bed of roses, yeah?
Indeed. In fact, you've talked about the fact that this was the hardest book for you to write so far. Why so?
Various issues. He's a dark character, so any artist will tell you that, what we write tends to impact us. We are emotional people, artists, right? We feel emotions more strongly. It's also the last 2 years emotionally has been a little difficult for me. So I guess maybe it kind of got into this negative feedback loop, right? My mood going into the book and the book's mood going into me, so it was just...
You become sort of also dark.
I'm happy it's over.
You're happy it's over. You start off actually with an apology to your writers, to your readers, I beg your pardon, for the long gap. You said, it's been hard. This is the longest I've taken to turn a book around.
It is the longest, and in fact, many of my readers were getting upset. I was getting lots of tweets, Facebook posts. If I even said that, look, I need to relax, I'm at this place, and posted a photo, they'd say, what the hell are you doing? Go and write. So, but like I always joke and say, it's good to have readers
who are waiting.
Yeah, who are saying, why haven't you written as yet, rather than saying, why the hell have you written?
Yeah. In fact, George R.R. Martin, who writes Game of Thrones,
it takes too freaking long.
And he takes so long that his readers started to write to him saying that, listen, you're getting older, you might die.
Exactly.
And we'll never know what happened in the end. I can't tell you what his response was because we can't repeat it on television.
Yeah, no, but I did see the picture. Sadly, the ending in the series left a lot to be desired.
No, but I believe the ending in the show and the ending in the books are going to be different.
Apparently so. So yeah, so one doesn't.
How else will he sell the books?
Yeah, exactly.
So the ending of the show, season 6, was written by the directors, and he just signed off on it.
Yes.
So knowing him, he was probably evil, and he knew it was a bad, poor, disappointing ending. He signed off on purpose. But you've also talked about, and there's a very interesting angle. Vishwamitra sort of engineering a villain for the good of Mother India. He said, we need a villain so that our hero can defeat him and then become a hero.
Right.
Again, was this creative liberty? Why did you decide to do this?
Some part of it, like the enmity between Guru Vishwamitra and Guru Vashisht, is actually based on ancient texts, right? So right back to Vedic times. I'm sure you're aware, Rig Veda is, there are 10 mandals in it.
Yeah.
And books 3 and 7, mandal 3 and 7 are from, the Vishwamitra family and the Vashishta family. And from Vedic times, there's been an enmity between Guru Vishwamitra and Guru Vashisht. And so much so that even now, millennia later, there are people of these two gotras who still dislike each other. I'm not joking, okay? Till this day. One of the things that you get when you explore the characters of both of them, they're both very simple, Spartan people, nothing for themselves, right? And very dedicated to the land, very dedicated to the society, but their perspective on what is good for society differs, right? And that leads to an enmity between each other. And Guru Vishwamitra's approach is, look, the end has to be right, but I'll take whatever path it takes, to reach that good end. Whereas Guru Vashishta's approach is, no, the means are as important as the end.
As the
And
end.
in some ways, their enmity is one of the defining things of the Ram Chandra series, because the worst enemy you can have is one who was once a very good friend, and that's what Guru Vishwamitra and Guru Vashisht were. They were very thick friends, and if you're a close friend, you know exactly the buttons to push. And it turns into a toxic enmity, and so part of what you see is actually there.
Professor X and Magneto, I guess. Okay, so I have to ask you about the other. When are the films coming out?
Yeah,
what's
so
going on with
the
that?
Shiva trilogy, the rights are back.
Back with
with
you,
me, and I have just signed a contract with a Hollywood guy. We are trying for a series. So
you're going to
Netflix-ish
let's see,
let's see. That's the attempt. It's a writer is always happier with a series because you have the gift of time, right? In a movie, you're forced to edit out quite a lot, so a lot of the nuance, a lot of the characterization, it gets lost. A lot of the philosophies will certainly get lost. But in a series, you have the gift of time.
Luxury too.
So luxury of time. That's a better term than the gift of time. So maybe I'll use that now. So this thing, so we're working on it. Let's hope it works out.
What about the? Are we calling it the Ram trilogy?
Ram Chandra Series.
Ram Chandra Series.
It's not a trilogy. It's 5 books.
It's just 5 books.
Yeah.
So, but you are going to. I mean, after the kidnapping, there will be, according to
so it's like
the little roadmap that you put out. You put pressure on yourself.
So it's like this. The first 3 of the 5 are in a multilinear narrative. So the first one, Ram, Sign of Vishwaku, from the birth of Lord Ram to the kidnapping of Sita Ma. Second, Sita, warrior of Mithila, from her birth to her kidnapping. Third, Raavan, enemy of Aryavarta, from his birth to the kidnapping. 4th book onwards is a common narrative. 5th book is the last book. So why I wanted to do it this way, it's a little complicated. I don't think it's been tried, at least I'm not aware of being tried in India before, but has been tried abroad. It's a very complicated style of writing. I'm never doing it ever again. But at least I think it's fun for a reader. And at least I've been told
because
my readers
have to crisscross it all and sort of match the details.
Exactly. A story rides on the shoulders of the principal characters, right? If you get the backstory of the characters well, you understand the story also well. And you will understand the point of the story, the philosophies in the story a lot better. So that's a perspective. But I'm never doing a multilinear narrative ever again. It's too complicated. Too complicated.
Not vacation after that. But I must ask you, and this is just when I was reading. So effectively, based on this book, the kidnapping happened when Ravana was about 60?
Yeah.
So I didn't realize he was that old. But I mean, is that...
Yeah, that's my interpretation.
It's just
he was certainly older than Lord Ram and Sita Ma. That's a given.
Okay.
That's a given. That is certainly true. That's there in the Valmiki Ramayana. That's in many of the Puranas as well, because you find a lot of his story before Lord Ram and Sita Ma even born, when he was Dashanan, and his attempt to force Lord Shiva to Lanka.
Yes.
So all that happened long time before. Yeah. So he was certainly older.
He was certainly older.
Yeah, that is true. How much older is a matter of debate. The versions of the Ramayana are not completely fixed. So like not too many of the versions of the Ramayana specify where he was born, for example.
Yes.
So he was not born in Lanka. That much is obvious, because Lanka was ruled by Kuber. He took over and kicked out Kuber, which is why Kuber had to go live with Lord Shiva in Kailash mountain. Lord Shiva gave him refuge. So then what happens is, if it's not there in the text, you look at folk traditions. Folk traditions show that Raavan was probably born close to Delhi, right? There's a place ahead of Noida.
Delhi boy.
No, but that's what the folk traditions say.
Okay,
the text don't say anything.
Don't say that, right.
Folk traditions are, his oldest temple is actually in the north, in close to Delhi, in a place called Bishrak, one of his oldest temples, and ahead of Noida, and that's where he's supposed to have been born. The place is named after his father, who was Vishrava. Another, very old temple of his is close to the MP Rajasthan border, called Mandsaur.
Yes.
His wife Mandodari was supposed to be from there. Yeah. So, but these are folk traditions.
It would make sense because he's tall and muscular, arrogant and hot-tempered. He's a Delhi boy.
I am not answering that.
But it is, and the other thing, and I don't know if we should, I mean, if I'm giving too much away, but the idea of him having a deformity and his father being sort of hard on him because of that, and the resentment building up from there again, it humanizes him.
Yeah, he was a Naga, and you've read my book, so you know what the concept is. That essentially a deformity on him, and in that sense, like what makes his childhood difficult, often really successful and powerful men tend to be terrible fathers because they are really hard on their children. And Raavan perhaps had that same problem. His father was extremely respected or revered almost, and he expected his son to, be as great as as he was, and therefore was extremely hard on him. And Raavan was capable, right? So he wasn't like a Jahangir was a moron. Akbar was brilliant. Jahangir was basically a drugged out guy all the time, right? So it was what Raavan in that sense it was a little more difficult for him because he was genuinely talented, right? And his thing was, he did not want to become great to impress his father. He wanted to become great to show his father down, right? And I think that's, one of my readers said this, that that if Raavan had a kinder, more loving father, perhaps actually he could have used his capability to become great rather than, a villain. Yeah.
Which is also, I suppose, that the sadness of the fact that all of those talents are being used for evil instead of being used for.
That's what makes him so much more complicated and so much more, in a troubling way, fascinating, right? Because he's not just a thug. He's not just an idiot who bashes people's head in. Right? Genuinely talented, genuinely well-read, could have been great, right? If only he had a kinder, more loving father, if only his love story had not been tragic, if only he'd listened to his younger brother,
his mother.
He could have. He'd never really respected his mother too much. So that was unlikely. But yeah, he had. There were chances, and his capability could have been, perhaps, been used for good.
Yeah. Well, you've stayed away from the press long enough, and now that you're back, we have to ask you some questions, and you can choose not to answer.
Of course.
As always. There's this whole controversy going on right now about the use of Jai Shri Ram. There were 49 artists who wrote a letter, just a couple of days ago, talking about how they believe that the use of the phrase in these incidents is wrong and has to be stopped in some way. The view then has been, it's split opinion down the middle. People say that the artists are basically saying that the Hindus are the perpetrators. They're suggesting that Hindus are perpetrators of these crimes. Where do you stand? Given that so much of your work is based on the life of Ram, where do you stand on all of this? I
proudly say Jai Shri Ram.
Yes. Where do you stand
I think one of the misfortunes of India is public debate has got extremely polarized.
Yes.
And my belief is that if you look at the data, don't look at anecdotes. We forget the scale of our country. We have 1.3 billion people. We have more people in India than all of North America, all of Europe, all of Middle East, all of North Africa put together.
Yes.
Right? To build we are more a continent than a country.
Yeah, that's true.
To build any kind of narrative on just 10, 15, 20 incidents, you can build any narrative. Yeah? If you look at all the regions I described, can you find 10 cases of humans biting dogs? Yeah, of course. If you look at across North America, Europe, Middle East, and North Africa, but can you then say, therefore, all these regions men are biting dogs? No, right? Right? You have to base a narrative on data. Okay. One of the things I find, I read 4 newspapers every morning. I read English and Hindi newspapers, and I find, unfortunately, a level of bias on both sides. Many of the Hindi language press have, unfortunately, a bias against Muslims, and English language press has a bias against Hindus. So you find incidents being reported as if it's a narrative. There are 1.3 billion people. You will find a few crazies. There are just so many of us.
Okay.
But if you look at the data, a vast majority of us, India is actually among the lowest per capita violence countries in the world, right? And this is not because our police is efficient or our criminal justice system convicts people like this.
Okay.
All criminals know they'll probably die of old age before they're convicted beyond all appeals, right? It's because as a people, I'm not saying India is perfect. There are many things we need to improve, but as a people, we are relatively less violent, right? Even the more violent cities like Mumbai, Delhi have 1/10 the violence rate of New York. This violence will bear more news of bad things does not mean that there are more bad things happening. I'm saying look at the data. That's all I'm suggesting. Look at the data. There are many things that aren't right with this country, but violence at a per capita basis is actually very low, and this is true across all communities. I argue against those who have a bias against Muslims. I argue against those who have a bias against Hindus.
What about those who have a bias against violence?
Of course, yeah. But violence is a part of life, no? Which country is completely non-violent, you tell me? Even a completely Buddhist or Jain city, there'll be some violence, right? It's a part of humanity. What will reduce this violence is a far more efficient criminal justice system.
Yes.
Right? That's the point one is trying to make. As a society, and I mean this across all groups in India, we are relatively very low violence.
In fact, the government was exploring the option or the possibility of the fact that the advent of WhatsApp and the speed at which rumors can basically fly might have or could have lent to the increase of crimes of this nature, because basically through WhatsApp you manage to gather a crowd faster, you manage to upset people faster, you manage to pass a rumor faster. That may be one of the cases. Do you think that there has to be now a criminal jurisprudence study into what's causing this and what the solutions may really be?
The thing which will help us the most, there's a book called Hans Rosling, called Factfulness by Hans Rosling. Just read that. It talks about violence actually across the world. It has come down drastically. I know we might not believe that seeing the news, but seriously, humanity is the most peaceful it has ever been. Having said that, what will really help India is actually a far more efficient criminal justice system. All criminals, people who take the law into their own hands, they all know nothing is going to happen. They all know that. And people who are genuinely innocent never go to a court, to a lower court, never go to a police station, because they know they'll get harassed and nothing will happen, right? Unless you have some contact, someone you can call. We don't approach the system. The problem is there. How do we make our system more efficient? Which brings me back to the point, with deepest respect to these artists. Like, for someone to have a bias against Islam because a few people are committing violence saying Allahu Akbar, that Allahu Akbar, there's nothing wrong with that slogan. It's a beautiful slogan. It's the same with Jai Shri Ram. It's a lovely slogan. I'm saying, I'm giving my respects to a God who defines India for many of us Indians, right? Across all religious groups. So, to go into this slogan might not be the correct way to present the argument. There is certainly a case for people being troubled with people taking the law into their own hands. And this is true. There are Hindus taking the law into their own hands. There are Muslims taking the law into their own hands. Let's be honest. And many of them, they are a tiny proportion of both these communities. Let's look at where the real problem is, which is our criminal justice system, which is paralyzed. That's the real problem. And I will never have any embarrassment in saying very proudly Jai Shri Ram. I say it very proudly.
All right. I do believe we've run out of time right now, but I quickly want to ask you this. What's the plan going forward? Obviously, I know that you deserve a vacation after this, but what's coming up?
Yeah, so this is a 5-book series. So the multi-linear narrative is over. Thank God. So the 4th book is a common narrative going forward. And the 5th book will be the last book. The 4th book will be till the death of Raavan. And the 5th book is when Lord Ram, his brothers and Sita Ma will go back and fight the battles that need to be fought to establish Meluha.
Yes.
One of the ways to see the Ram Chandra series, it's a 1500-year prequel to the events of the Shiva trilogy. Yeah, so look forward to the 4th and especially the 5th book. Right, and I'll not take so long, I promise. to all my readers, sorry guys, I'll not take so long.
But it's been a pleasure chatting with you as always. Thank you so much for coming in. Congratulations on the new book. I wish you very, very good luck. And of course, we look forward to everything else that's in the pipeline. All right, Amish Tripathi, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you. God bless.